Hello people and welcome to Finance Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect and we grow. Pivot tables. I'm sure you are conversant with how to use this to summarize data in Excel. What of Power Query? Power Query is used to transform shape data for analysis. There's also Power Pivot and the data model in Excel. We use that to connect multiple related tables. Then there's DAX, which are regular calculations in the data model to get insights from our data. When we are done with this, we normally want to visualize. Apart from regular charts, we use sparklines, timelines, slicers to make it interactive for our users. In some cases, we use cube functions to make our staging of pivot tables flexible. Maybe you're not conversant with all these tools. Don't worry. What we've done is that we've put all these tools together in this practical case study. We are sharing the start file with you so you can come along and practice step by step. So if you are game, let's roll up our sleeves and get started in Excel. Okay, so before we begin, let's have a quick walkthrough of how we are going to build this dashboard. We'll begin with two tables. One records data on actual expenditure and income. So basically it has 4 columns: date, description, category, and amount. Right. Now, this is going to be compared with another budget data. So this is the budget data. This records budget data for categories listed in column A, which is further grouped into classes in column B, and then further grouped into expense and income. So to make it easier to relate, if you take something like internet, the person has budgeted 550 for the 12 months in the year. So this budget data is what we hope to compare with the actual data in here to get a sense of whether we're able to meet our budget, whether we overspent or we earned more than we targeted. We'll go through some calculations, very simple calculations. This is going to be the backstage for all the elements in the dashboard. Then we'll build this simple personal finance dashboard, color coded to help us know how we fared with our actual income and actual budget. So the way this works, it highlights the month in the year with the highest income and the highest expense. It also shows us our variance indicators. So in the event we didn't achieve our income, it shows red and shows us the variance. And if we also underspent, which is a good scenario in this case, we also have this green that shows us the variance as well. We also have an average percentage spent by month in this spark line, but overall, this is how much we spent of the income that came in the year. Of course, this is not flat. We can always break down by month, right? So I can take each month to get a sense of the actual and budget numbers, okay? Then also look at this chart, which helps me break down by income lines and expenses, right? So we'll be using all the BI tools in Excel to build this, just to give you a sense of how this works, okay? So if you're game, let's get started. Okay, so before we get started, let's go through a blueprint or a map of all the tools that we are going to use. So you already know we are using two tables, actual and budget. So we'll have to do transformation on these two tables. We are going to use Power Query to do that. So in Power Query, we'll take these two tables, change the shape and form in some cases, and then make the necessary adjustments to optimize the two tables for our analysis. Once we are done with Power Query, we'll connect these two tables, actual and budget, using Excel's Power Pivot, where we'll create a data model. So a data model allows us to connect these two tables using the common relationship. Then once we are done, we'll create some DAX calculations. DAX are regular formulas that you create in the data model to help you analyze the data or get insights. So once we create this, we can now stage our pivot tables for the summaries that we are going to use for our dashboard In some cases, we may use cube functions to maintain the layout of our pivot tables for flexibility. Then once we are done, we'll use this stage to create our chart, use slicers and spark lines, and then create our final dashboard. Now, this map ensures that if there is any update in the original data source, on refresh, all the key performance indicators on our dashboard would also get updated. So you don't have to start from scratch. That's the basic idea. So this is the map we are going to use, and we are going to use this to guide us as we start. Okay, so the first step is to convert our two data sets into actual tables. I know it looks and feels like a table, but in Excel, a table is a dedicated object used to store structured data. It allows us to use the names of the tables in our calculations. We can easily create references or make inferences from the table without physically being in the table. It will help us in Power Query, Power Pivot, and our subsequent analysis. So to insert a table, we'll go to Insert, then we insert a table. You could also use Control T to get this done. So we click OK. Again, the advantage of tables is that when you add new data, you don't have to reconfigure or make changes in your formulas. On refresh, your formulas get updated using the names of the table. So the name we are going to give this one is actual. I'll do that under table design. So I'll come here, I'll name this actual. The next thing I'm going to do is also convert the budget data into a table. So Control T in this case. I'm going to convert this into a table as well. Right, so we now have two tables, actual and budget, for our analysis. Now let's spend some time here on our budget data. Ideally, if you go by the rules of structuring data, what we need is that the various categories and values for our analysis should be sitting in dedicated columns. So we already have category here, we have class here, we have type here. If you look on this side of the data, from D to column O, we have a mix of two data types, dates and values. Ideally, we should also have the dates sitting in a dedicated column and the corresponding values also side by side the date. Right, so this form and structure is not going to be useful for our pivot table analysis. We need to modify it. In the end, we'll end up with category, class, type, date, and the amounts that we want to analyze. We can't do this here directly, so we need to go into Power Query to get this transformation done. But alongside, we also bring the actual data so that we make all the necessary modifications in Power Query, and then we move on with the optimized version of these two data sets. So I'm going to launch Power Query. So to launch Power Query, you come to Data, right? On the far left, you see Get and Transform Data. So it's most likely your Excel version may have a different name, but it will still be under Data on the far left. This is the Power Query Get Data option. Now, there are various sources that we can get data from, but in our case, we already have a table. The table icon is right here, right? So standing in the table, you can go here and then click inside to load the data into Power Query. So this is the data for our actual in Power Query. So this is the Power Query environment. You notice that all our columns are here. In the process of transforming this data, there are going to be steps that will be used to transform the data, and each step is going to be recorded. So the first step is where it got the data from. So this is in the formula bar. This is an M code, right? So it tells us that the name of the table is actual. It got the content from this current workbook, right? Every step we do here is going to be added on. Then we don't have to start from scratch if we are on a schedule that always repeats these actions. So think of it like an Excel macro. Every step is going to be recorded, played on your behalf when you refresh, if it's the same actions you are doing every time. So we are going to take advantage of this M code or the formula here to bring in our actual data. So you can step in, click on source, highlight, copy. Then we are going to launch a new query. So that new query is going to be used to bring in the content of our budget data. So I'll right click, new query, other sources, blank query. Just launching a container that will be used to bring in our new query. So I'm going to paste this. Then, as you would have guessed, I'm changing the actual name to a budget. This brings home the advantages using tables and naming them, right? So once you are done, you can just press enter. So without stepping out of Power Query, you still get the data in the budget table. Now it comes in here as a new query. We can rename it. So let's rename this budget. Right, so we now have our actual and then we have our budget. So let's go in to start doing the transformations. So as I mentioned earlier, category, class, and type are okay. So we need to just make sure that these last 12 columns are converted into 2 columns that would have the corresponding date and amount. This process is called on-pivoting, right? So we can highlight the first 3 columns that are okay, 1, 2, 3, right click, and in the right click menu, you see on pivot other columns, right? We are doing this because it is the unselected columns that we are on pivoting, right? So I'll do that. Now, it converts the 12 columns of data into an attribute which contains the date and values which contains the budgeted amount, right? So let's rename these. So I can rename this date and then rename this amount. Okay, now the next step is to format our date properly, right? Usually when you come into Power Query, you need to ensure that you have assigned the correct data type. This is the data types we have, right? So it will normally do it for you automatically. That's why we have this change type step here, right? So at this point, this has to be profiled as a correct date. If we proceed with this format, you notice that it really doesn't interpret the date well. In my case, it actually makes the year the day. So we need to make a little modification before we apply the data type. So I'm going to reverse this step. Now, what we can use in this case is to add a prefix. So a consistent 1- will make it possible to convert these into proper dates. So we now can add a prefix using the transform tab here. Under format, we can add a prefix, right? So with the date column highlighted, I'm going to add a 1- and click OK, right? So this now gives me something that looks like a date. I can now proceed and then add my date type to this. I get it correctly interpreted. So this will now do for my date. Okay, now beyond this transformation, we could now look at the story we want to tell. We have 2 tables. The 2 tables are giving us something to measure, actual and budget. If you look at the final dashboard, beyond getting the calculations, we are going to break down by type, category, and month. Ideally, the slicers that you are using to filter or break down should be sitting in separate tables we call dimension tables, right? It makes it easier. It makes your work a bit more structured, especially when you are handling large data volumes. Okay, so we are going to create a dimension table that would have each category, the type, and then the class it belongs to in one table. Then we'll create another dimension table that will help us break down our analysis by date. So to do that, we already have category, class, and type in this budget query. So I'm going to create a copy of this budget query by referencing. So when I right click, I can choose reference. Okay, this creates a copy of the entire data in that query and maintains a link to the original source. If you are having a scenario where you want your queries to speak to each other, even though one is a copy of the other, you use reference, right? Otherwise, if you just want a regular copy, you could use duplicate, where you duplicate all the steps and the content, right? So in this case, referencing will work for us. So now that we have this copy, let's name it categories. Then we will highlight the columns we need: category, class, and type, using the shift right arrow keys. I'll right click these three and remove other columns. This ensures that I keep my first three columns. Now, the thing with dimension tables is that we should have in the primary column, which is the category column, unique entries. Okay, so we shouldn't have duplicates in the primary column, which is the category column here. So with these three columns highlighted, I can just right click and remove all duplicates, right? This would ensure that at least my category column doesn't have duplicates. So that's a key feature of dimension tables, so that we can use this to connect to our fact tables. So we are done with one dimension table. We need to now proceed with the second dimension table, which is our calendar table. So for our calendar table, the role it's going to perform for us is to help us break down our calculations or filter by date. So we need to make sure that the timeline covers every activity from when we started budgeting all the way to our latest entry in our actual, right? So we use a formula that will pick the first date of action, which is 1st January 2024, all the way to the latest date in our data, which is the 31st of December in the actual query, right? So just as we did, we are going to launch a new query. Right click, new query, other sources, blank query, right? So this allows us to put in our M code to generate the content of our calendar table. Now I'm going to zoom in a bit so that you can follow this. So we are writing a formula that basically is going to grab the first date, add a daily series of dates to this date, and then moves it all the way to the last date, right? So it's going to create a timeline to ensure that every date is present in here. So this is case sensitive, so please type it as you see it. Number.from. So this is a function that's going to grab a number or give us a value. Okay. Now, dates are numbers. So number.from is going to get a number we will convert into a date. Now, that date is going to come from a column that has our earliest action. So we are introducing a new function called list.min. List.min returns the minimum value in a range. Okay. So this is going to grab the earliest or minimum date from our budget table, open square brackets, date. That is the name of the column, right? So this is my formula. I'll close list.min and then close number.from, right? Now so I'm going to copy this, Control C, come here, 2 dots for the series we are going to create, and then paste what I just copied on the other side. So based on what I explained, what this means is, so to get a series of dates all the way to the latest date, our maximum point is going to be max in this case, and then I'll change the budget to actual, right? Because the latest date in budget is 1st December, but actual goes beyond that point. Okay, so this is our full formula, but before we press enter, to give us that list, we have to hold this in curly brackets. So right after the equal sign, you put in a curly bracket, then at the end, you put in a curly bracket, right? So just have a quick look to be sure everything is fine. Number.from, list.min, budget date, 2 dots after 2 closing brackets, number.from, list.max, actual date, 2 closing brackets, curly brackets, start and end, right? So we'll press enter, and this is going to give us a list that contains values we can convert to dates. Okay, so this is the list, I'm going to convert this to a table. So in the top left, you see the option to convert this to a table. I'll click to convert this into a table. So I have my first primary column in my date table. I'll name this date. Then I'll change this data type to a proper date. So you notice that indeed I have 1st January 2024 moving all the way to 31st December 2024. Let's rename this calendar. Right. Now we need to add all the date attributes that we will use in our analysis. So to do that, we are going to add these date attributes as new columns using the add column option here. So this add column option, using the date icon in this middle part, allows us to draw every date attribute we will need. So as an example, if I need year, I'll draw year. We have only one instance for year, so we have 2024 throughout. I want to do month, so I'll select date, come here, then I'll pull month. This month would actually give me 1 to 12, 1 for January, 12 for December. In the process of doing our analysis, we'll need this column to properly sort our month names. So talking of month names, we need to go to date, go to this date icon, come here and now draw name of month. So this is the name of the month. Now, if you look at our final dashboard, we want to abbreviate this. So while I'm here, I'll select month name, go to transform, right? I'm here to extract the first 3 characters. So I'll come to extract first characters and then put in the first 3 characters. Okay. So this will complete our calendar table. So it depends on what you are using the calendar table for. You can draw quarter and all those attributes. So basically what we have created are 2 fact tables, actual and budget, giving us something to measure, and then 2 dimension tables, categories and calendar, to help us break down or filter our calculations. Now before we proceed, if you look at the final dashboard, you'll notice that our income lines are positive numbers and our expense are negative numbers. Okay, we need to do this so that we can have a sense of our net position and be able to create a chart like this. So to do this in Power Query, we first need to identify a column that will help us assign the positive and negative signs, right? If I come to the budget, this column is type. So I'm going to use this as basis to run an if statement so that I can negate all expenses in the amount column, vice versa, make positive the numbers that are income. So to do that, we are going to add a custom column. So let's do that by going to add column. You find custom column here. Okay, so I'll click on this. We'll leave the name as custom for now. Later we'll change it. So basically what we're trying to do here is that if the column type contains expense, okay, we should take the corresponding amount and then multiply it by -1. Otherwise, we return the original value in the amount column. So again, this is an M code, case sensitive. So let's go through it slowly. Okay, so the formula is going to be if in lowercase type is equal to expense. Okay, then we want to grab the corresponding amount, multiply by -1, right? Else we bring the original amount, right? So this is going to ensure that at every point in time our expenses are negated and the income remains positive, right? So with this done, what we expect to get is when I click OK, you'll notice that I now have a new column called custom. Now this column is similar to the amount column apart from the signs, right? We are going to use this for our calculation. So I'm going to delete this original one. Okay, then rename this amount and from this point, I can properly assign the data type to this. It's important you do this so that when it comes to aggregations, these numbers will respond. Okay, so we've done for budget. Because it's a like-for-like analysis, I think it's important that we do same for actual. So if you look at the actual table, we have date, we have description, we have category, and we have amount. There's nothing here that would help us identify what type it is, whether it's an expense or an income. So we have to essentially do a lookup using the category column, right? If you look at the dimension table we created here, for each category, there's a corresponding type, right? So if you can get a way to look up the type from the categories table, we may be lucky to be able to now use the column that has been brought in to now assign the right negative and positive numbers. Okay, so to do this in Power Query, we'll go through a process called merging. So merging allows us to look up two queries if there is at least one common column between the two. In this case, we have category here and category in the categories dimension table. So standing in home in the actual table, we go to merge queries. Now we have the option to merge as new. We choose the original one, merge queries. We don't want a new query created out of this. So first one, merge queries. Actual, where I started from, becomes my first table. I'm looking up my information from the categories table. This becomes my second table. The requirement for merging is that at least we should have a common column in both cases. So category is here, category is there. This one has a unique list, this one has duplicates. Okay, we are doing a left outer join, meaning that we want to maintain every record in the left table as long as it matches the right table. So all 297 records in the actual table find their type. That is why you have this here, 297 of 297. I'll proceed and click OK. So now you have the categories table virtually present in your actual table. So you notice that the category table has a diverging arrow as an icon. You can click on this to expand. This allows you to choose what your result column should be. So in this lookup process, we basically wanted to return the type. So I'll uncheck everything and then check type. Then I'll uncheck the use original column name as prefix. This is just going to add the original column, the original table name to this current column name, which makes it long. So you just uncheck it. So if I click OK, I expect to now see the type for each record, whether it's an income or expense, right? I'm going to use this as basis to do the formula we did earlier. So let's proceed with that. So I'll come to add column, custom column. Let's maintain the name for now. So if, again, type, which we just brought in, is equal to expense, then we'll take amount with a square bracket, multiply this by -1, else we choose amount, right? So this is the formula, right? Ensure that you are using the right case, put in the right double quotes. So once no syntax error has been detected, you can now proceed and click OK. Okay, so just as we did earlier, this comes in as a custom column. At this point, we can delete the type and amount columns. Really, they've served their purpose, so we can now highlight and delete them. Then we rename this amount. Okay, it's important you remember to assign the right data type, which is a decimal number in this case. So we've used Power Query to ensure that our two fact tables, actual and budget, are similar in terms of structure. Okay, these two fact tables are going to give us our calculations. We are going to break down or filter using the categories and calendar tables, or we call them dimension tables. So with these 4 tables, we can now proceed, load them into the data model, and then continue with our analysis. So we'll round this up. We'll come to home, then exit by loading. So in the options to load, when you drop down, you have close and load to. So I'll choose close and load to, which will give me the option to load as a table, pivot table, pivot chart. Because we are working and we are not done with our final output, we hold these as a connection for now, okay, and add the 4 queries to the data model, where we are going to connect them using the common relationship that exists. Okay, so we'll conclude this first part by loading them to the data model. Click OK, and you notice that your 2-dimension tables, categories, and calendar are now loaded with the 2 fact tables, actual and budget. Next up, we'll go into the data model and learn how to connect this. Okay, so now we have to move to the data model. In Excel, we create the data model in Power Pivot. Now, on your right are your queries. So you can always go back to Power Query by double clicking on any of these queries. If it's not showing, you can go to Data, Queries and Connections. In some cases, you see Show Queries. Right, so if I double click, I can come back here. If you have any changes you have to do. In this case, we should have actually formatted this column in the proper date format. Right, so you could do that and then load directly because you've already committed how this should load. So just click on this and it would update the query that you changed. Okay, so that's how you go in and out. But now let's go to Power Pivot. Power Pivot allows us to create our data model. It will normally sit here as a tab, but if yours is not showing, you have to activate it for the first time. So to do that, you come to Data, right? Then you look for the Data Tools group. You look for this lemon cube, right? So if you click on this, it should open up a new window. Now this will be your Power Pivot environment. If you close this window, you should now see Power Pivot sitting as a tab on your command tabs list. Okay, so that's how we are going to go about it. Because we've already committed these into the data model, when we go into Power Pivot using this manage icon, okay, we should now see our 4 tables here in this data view, right? So in this Power Pivot view, we call this the data view, where we see the tables that we committed to our data model. To make it easier to connect, we are going to switch from data view to the diagram view. So here you see all the tables represented in these square shapes, okay? They are movable, right? So you can click in the white space and then move them around. You recall I mentioned the 2 types of tables we are using. The set called fact tables that contain data that we can measure. The fact tables are usually the transaction tables. Okay, so in our case, actual and budget, okay, are our fact tables. We normally place them downstream, if you like, and then we place the tables that help us filter upstream, right? So if you have many dimension tables, you can layer them at the top like that. It's not as if it affects your calculation in any way, but visually it helps you understand that we calculate downstream, and then the tables up here provide the filters and slicers that will help us break our calculations down. Now, when it's arranged like this, all we need to do is identify the common columns in each table, connect them, and then use this to create the data model. So I'll take categories, compare with actual. To connect these 2 tables, category here and there are common, right? So you can take it from either direction, up, down, down, up. So I'll click on category and connect it to this category up here. Now you notice this one to many. with an arrow flowing down, just to validate what I said earlier. Filters coming downstream to break down our calculations. But 1 here represents the fact that there's only one entry for each category in the dimension table above. But in the fact table, because it's a transaction table, we can spend or earn on a particular category as many times in a day or within the period. Okay, so that's why we have the star representing many. This is the primary key. The other counterpart here is the foreign key. So you need to know these terms in data modeling here in Excel. We are going to do the same thing for calendar and actual. In this case, dates and dates. Again, a one-to-many relationship using the same explanation that I did earlier. Then for budget, we'll take category, connect it to category up here, always ensuring that the one side is coming from the dimension table into the fact table. And then finally, we'll do our date from budget all the way to our calendar, right? So all you need to ensure is that the arrow is flowing from the dimension table into the fact table. So what this means is that instead of using probably 4 pivot tables on each of these tables, this connection has created a data model that can be used as the data source for all our analysis. It means I can calculate from budget, break down by category, calculate from actual, break down by calendar. As long as they are connected, I can use just one pivot table to speak to all these 4 tables. That is the essence of the data model. So from this point, we'll now use the data model to stage our summary tables using pivot tables. Okay, so before we exit Power Pivot, if you are using an older version of Excel, you have the option to start your pivot table summaries right from here. But if yours is a recent version, you can actually exit, create a new calculation sheet. So let's do that. So I'll hit a plus sign for the new calculation sheet. I'll rename this calculations. And this is where we are going to stage all our calculations, right? So now we need to insert our first pivot table. So if I come to insert pivot table, I now have the option to insert my pivot table from the data model, right? So let's try that and see what we get. I'm placing this in this existing worksheet, okay? So just as we normally get with pivot tables, the pivot table fields are here, but you notice that instead of just a single table, we now have the 4 tables that actually were transformed in Power Query, sent to the data model. These are the 4 we are going to use for analysis. Then the original data sets, the ones we converted to tables before we went to Power Query, are here, okay? So these are the last 2. So essentially, we're going to work with the top 4, okay? If you open, you realize that all our columns are present there. Okay, now where do we start from? We have to create calculations, or what we call measures. So measures are calculations from the data model. We are going to use DAX, data analysis expressions. So if you are already comfortable with Excel formulas, it's a good foundation. Just that in the DAX environment, we'll be using more of the column and table references to do our calculations. Now, we want to begin by summing our actual amount and budget amount to establish our net position. Okay, so if you go into Power Pivot, I just want to show you how the tables look like. In the actual table, we have an amount column that is a mix of negative and positive numbers. If we sum this column, what we are essentially getting is the net position, how much money was left. That is, if we didn't overspend. Same thing here. If we get these 2 measures, we can break down by category, we can break down by date, okay, compare the 2 and all that. So these 2 calculations are going to be critical in all our analysis. So we have to calculate them as measures. Now, to do that, we can use the Power Pivot tab you see measures right here. So we start a new measure. It opens up this dialog box. The first section deals with a table name, basically where we are storing the measures. It helps to know where these measures are stored. In some case studies, we can create a dedicated table to store all our measures, but for this purpose, let's decide to keep all the measures in the actual table. So let's call this first measure actual net. Okay, so we'll do this. Now, you can put in the description to give you a little bit context on how these measures were created. Then you step in your formula area. This is where you write your DAX. So this is going to be a basic sum of the actual table. Okay. Then I'll select the amount column. Right. So this is what we are summing. So I'll close this. Check formula to be sure everything is fine. You can format your measures right here. Use 1000 separator. We set this to 2 decimal place and we click OK. Okay. So what is going to happen is we are going to have our first measure right here, which is just a sum of all the amounts in the actual table. Let's repeat the same thing for our budget. So I'll come to measure, new measure, still staying in the actual table. We have budget net. Because the structure of the tables are the same now, it means that we can use the same formula on budget amount. Format this number, use 1000 separator, 2 decimal place. Looks fine here. Then we click OK. Okay. So if you look at this closely, what this means is, in terms of the net position at the end of the year, right, we're expecting to have a budget surplus of 9,000. We ended up with 7,000. Okay. But this in itself doesn't bring in a lot of insights unless we decide to break it down. So let's now break it down by the dimension table. And this is where you have to be careful. Once there's a dimension table, anything that you are using to filter or break down your calculations should come from the dimension table. So I open up categories, take type, and then push this to the row section. Okay, so this will now give me the breakdown of the net position. So expense is this, income is that. So that is how we are going to proceed. Okay, so at this point, you can even decide to sort this so that the income goes up, right, to make it easier on the eye. So we now have our actual net, we have our budget net. If you look at our final dashboard, we're interested in the variance. Were we able to meet targets or not? But as the pivot table comes up like this, we can take advantage and insert our slicers. So if you look at the final dashboard, we are using 3 slicers: type, category, and the month name. Okay, so we can insert this directly. Come to insert, slicer. We'll switch from active to all so that we can see all the tables. So as I mentioned, filters come from the dimension table. So from category, I'm going to insert type and then category, right? Then for my calendar table, I'm going to use the month name. So these are the 3 slicers coming from this pivot table. Okay, so later we will sort the slicers out, but for now, these are the 3 slicers that we are going to use. So just a quick check-in to see how it's going. Hopefully now you get an idea on how you can use these tools at work. Power Query, Power Pivot, the data model to connect multiple related tables. You've done a bit of DAX calculations, but maybe you want to deep dive and then see how you can use these tools to help you at work. I'd like to recommend my book, Data Modeling with Microsoft Excel. You can grab this. This has a case study that can walk you through how you can apply these tools. I've shared a link on the screen where you can get a soft copy and exercise files on Amazon. So let's continue with our case study and we'll learn how to use pivot tables to stage and apply conditional formatting and dynamic labels to our final dashboard. Now, let's calculate the percentage change. So if we're doing this directly, it's going to be the actual here divided by budget minus 1. Okay, so this will give us the variance. If you copy this down, you realize that in the context of expenses, this is supposed to be a positive variance because we underspent, right? We are going to be using this for our red and green labels. So what we want to do is to use the signs appropriately. So if we underspent, we want that variance to be a positive variance. If we didn't meet income, we want it to be a negative variance. Right. So it means we need to do a little adjustment to accommodate the signs in the expense. Right. The income side is fine, but the expense, we'll have to invert the signs a bit. Now, to take care of this, we are going to run an if formula. Okay. That will say that if this actual is greater than 0, return positive 1, which is like the regular calculation. Otherwise, return negative 1. Okay. So if we do it like this, then it means that we can have 1 or negative 1 depending on the value in either income or expense. This is the index we are going to use to multiply the original calculation. So I'll multiply this open bracket. Okay. Then our variance calculation, which is actual divided by budget minus 1 into brackets. Okay. So this would ensure that when our expense is below our budgeted expense, we can have a positive variance or a green. Okay. Then vice versa, if we come up here, you realize that the 17% is as it should be, that we didn't achieve our income budget. Right. So I just wanted to do this formula here for you to understand the use of the if function to generate the 1 or negative 1, which will multiply through by the original formula. We're not going to do this directly here. We are going to take the same formula into the data model and then create a DAX formula out of it. So let's go to the data model. So come to the data model, come to Power Pivot, Measures, New Measure. So let's call this percentage variance. Okay, so here it's similar to what we did earlier. If, let's use actual net as basis, is greater than 0, return 1. Otherwise, minus 1. Okay. Then whatever it throws out, we are multiplying by actual net divided by, so these are the two measures that we created earlier, minus 1. Okay. So we'll close our bracket for this. Now let's check if this formula is correct. It looks okay here. This is going to be a percentage. So we choose number and then we'll come here and then set this to a percentage to 2 decimal place. Okay. We'll click OK. Let's see if it gives us the same calculations that we had earlier. Right. So we have our negative variance 16.5% and our positive variance 15.81. If we go through the category slicer, we may be able to test if this is working correctly. So charity is an expense. Okay. We budgeted 8,000. We spent 6,000, positive 25.31. Let's see consultancy. That's an income line. We budgeted 48,000. We came in with 43. That's a negative variance. Okay. So let me try and get one expense that gives us a negative variance. Yeah. So for fuel, we budgeted 3,600. We overspent, right? So this comes in as negative. This is important because it's this calculation we are going to use to show the green and red in the final analysis here. Okay. So that's why we need to get this right. So I'm going to clear this slicer and then we'll calculate our next measure, which is just the absolute variance. In this case, we are basically subtracting actual and budget directly. So again, we want this to pass through the data model. So we'll go to measures new measure. Let's name this GHS currency variance in this case. So we'll come down here. This is going to be actual minus our budget. These two measures. Check our formula. Looks fine here. We set this to 1000 separator 2 decimal place number, and we click OK. Right. So this comes directly into our pivot table. So for income, we're short 19,000, and then for expense, we returned a positive variance of 17,000. Right. That's basically the story we want to tell. Now, this pivot table and these three slicers are critical in our final dashboard, because what this pivot table will give us, right, is this whole section of our dashboard, our income section here and our expense section here. Okay, then our slicers are in here. So what we need to do is now use the logic that we established to create this dynamic green and red label. Okay, so let's see how we do that. Okay, so we are going to create our income label, basically to show us if we had a positive variance or not. Then we'll create the expense label using the same logic. Now, what we want to do is a simple if statement. So the if statement is going to be if this variance, okay, is greater than 0, then we want to show this variance, okay, with the percentage variance side by side, right? So we will bring an ampersand to join this, bring a double quote, and separate that number with a pipe. So the pipe is the character on top of your enter key in a typical Windows keyboard layout. Okay, we space this and then we close the double quote. So this is going to be like the separator. We join this with the variance. Okay, so if this is greater than 0, we want to show the amount and the percentage variance, and also include a triangle that points upwards. Okay, so that symbol is going to show that we have a positive variance. Right, now that symbol is going to be a character, so I'm bringing the ampersand and the quotes. I'll go to insert, go to my symbols in the symbol list. Okay, you can, if you're not seeing this, you can set this to Arial. Okay, then set the subset to geometric shapes, and you should see this black up pointing triangle, right? So I've recently used it. So I'm going to insert this. So once I insert, you see something like this. I'll close this, I'll come back here, and then I'll hold this with another double quote, right? So basically what I'm trying to say here is that we want to show this variance, the absolute variance, and the percentage variance, okay, with the up pointing triangle, which is going to be green when we are done. Okay, if this is a positive variance. Now, if not, we want this to be a down pointing, the same label but down pointing. So for you to understand this, I'm going to copy the same true value into the false section, right? So that you appreciate how it comes. Then we'll just modify it step by step. Okay. So I'm getting something like this, right? So 19805 pipe, then I have my 0.16, right? So we're not getting a very elegant display, right? Because we've not formatted the numbers correctly, right? So we need to put comma separator 2 decimal place and also format this as a percentage, right? So let's modify our formula in that regard. So if I come here to my formula, let me do it in the formula bar to make it easier. This original value, which is the G4 that is going to be displayed in Ghana cedis, we want to format it directly in the formula. We can use the text function. Okay, so the text function allows us to apply a format to this. So after the G4, that is the value, I'll bring a comma and then introduce the formatting script or text. Now for the comma separated 2 decimal place, we are going to bring a double quote and then put in hash, comma, hash, hash, 0.00, close double quotes. Okay, so this, when I close my final text, this is going to be the format for the absolute variance, right? So this is what we have. Now the percentage also has to be formatted. So the same logic, we are going to step in front of the F4, which is the one returning the percentage, and then introduce the text function here. So the F4 is the generic percentage value we saw. We want to format this, comma, double quote. Okay, this is going to be 2 decimal places, so 0.00 percentage, and we will close the double quotes and then close our brackets for the text. Okay, so this is what we have. Now again, let me just copy the whole of this for the true value, Control C, and then paste it on the false value side to make it easier. So I'll paste this here, right? So let's see what we get. So if I press enter, you notice that this version we have is a bit more elegant, right? So we have minus 19805.00, and then we have our 16.5 correctly formatted. But what we want is that, let me just expand this a bit. So after creating this, the expectation is that if I come into any label, I should see this dynamic label updates, right? So that is what we are going to use as basis to convert to red or green. Now that we have this, let's do the false side. Remember, we pasted the original value. So let's come here and then do the false side. So if I step in here, this is my logical test. You can click on it just to be sure. This is your value if it is true, right? And then this is your value if it is false. The only thing we are changing here is the up pointing triangle. Okay, so instead of this, we want this to point down if it's a negative variance. So I'll gently come in here, go to insert symbol, and instead of the up pointing, I'll choose the down pointing triangle and then insert this, right? So I'll close, and now when I press enter, I now get a variance as it should, right? So if I test for charity, it points upwards. If I test for fuel, it points downwards, right? So that's how we are going to do this. Now this is for the income label. We want to set for the expense label as well. So let's copy down and then edit this for expense. So this is going to be the expense label. Okay, so now that we have this, all we need to do is simply copy down our expense label, right? We've done all the hard work. So we realize that it correctly references the expense label. Because we've set the sign, we can still maintain the up and down pointing triangles as it is. Okay, so this works. There are 2 issues that we need to fix. If you click on a particular category, you realize that instead of getting the income and expense lines to stay, it actually filters, right? I mean, an ideal solution would have been to stop this from folding up if we click on a category. In some cases, you could right click, come to the pivot table options. Okay. Under display, we can choose to show items with no data in both rows and columns. But unfortunately, this scenario will not allow that. It will still fold when we click on a single category. So what we basically need to do is to find a way to get the slicer still filter this pivot table and maintain the income and expense lines, right? So to do that, we need to convert this pivot table into cube formulas. I mean, we won't lose anything. It will just maintain the shape of the pivot table. Our slicers will still work and we'll still be able to get updates when our data source changes. So let's learn how to do that. Select the pivot table, come to pivot table analyze. Under the OLAP tools, you see the option to convert to formulas. Right. So if I click on convert to formulas, in just some seconds, you see that this has now been converted into formulas. Right. So now if I click on charity, you realize that it now blanks out our income label. If I click on consultancy, which is an income, it blanks out our expense label. Right. So this is the kind of behavior we wanted. If I click on the 2, that is clear the filter, I have the 2 back. Okay. So this is going to help us toggle when the user chooses an income line or an expense line. Okay. So now that we have this, let's go in and apply our conditional formatting. Okay, so now that we have our income label and expense labels, these are dynamic labels, right? We are going to insert them here. Right? It's going to show us green when we do well, red when we don't do well. Okay, we need to put in the conditional formatting to reflect this. So to do the conditional format, we select this income label. Okay, so this is where the conditional formatting is going to happen. We need to test it against a certain value. So we're going to use the same logic. If this is greater than 0, green, if it's less than 0, red. Okay, when we do it for this level, we can just copy it down for the expense. So let's select this one, go to conditional formatting, new rule. Okay, we are using a formula to determine which cells to format. Now that formula says that if I come here, if this is greater than 0, now before I proceed, because I want this to be copied down directly to the expense label, I don't want to lock this absolutely, right? So I'm taking the $sign off the 4 to make it easier for me to just apply this downwards. So if this G4 is greater than 0, okay, we want to fill the cell green. Okay, so once I've set this equation, I'll come to format. Let's deal with the fill first. Now I have some codes here. So these colors and design tips I borrowed from Laura Zipezi. I hope I got the name right. Thank you for these insightful tips. I like your design. You can check out her LinkedIn page. So the colors for green, more colors, okay. And then we use this custom green. I'm going to put in the hex code so that you can use this. For the hex code is going to be this one. So this gives us this light fill for the green. I'll click OK. For the font, we are going to use another custom green color. So I'll come to this, and this is the green color we are using. 00BF63. Okay, so this will give us a deeper color. Alright, so that we get that nice combination of the green font with the green font and then the light green background. Right. So this is going to happen when it is greater than 0. I'll click OK and click OK. So at this point, let's test it for charity. So if you click for charity, you notice that we get the colors even though it is not positive, right? It is showing us the colors for that combination. Okay. Now let's set for the situation where it is negative. So we select this, go back to conditional formatting, new rule, same process, use a formula. So I'll come here, set G4, select G4. If you like F4, F4 to take off the $ from the 4. This time round, if this is less than 0, this is for our red condition. What we want is we use this format. We'll come to fill, okay. Then for the red color, we are going to use this custom one. So again, I'm going to put in the hex code. So this is going to be FF D, right? So this gives us this nice soft red background, pink. It looks like that. I'll click OK for this. Then for our font, we'll come here. Then for our font color, again, we'll click on more colors, come to custom, and our hex code for this is going to be this one, FF3131, right? So that is the red we are going to use for this, right? So this is the combination. When it's less than 0, then we'll click OK, right? So because this is less than 0, you should have the red show, and in the event you have something that is not less than 0, you should have this green, okay? So let's now apply this format. I can select this, go to Format Painter, and then just apply this here. Okay, so you'll notice that because of the way we set our referencing, it will just pick the label as it should. Okay, so at this point, if I select consultancy, you notice that I have a red here for consultancy, which we didn't do well. If I select only fuel, again, for fuel, we had a negative variance, so it shows us red, right? This is working, but what we need to fix is, in the event we select only an expense, in this case charity, we don't want income label to show up at all, right? So we want this to be clean. We don't want any interfering green here. So to do that, let's set a third conditional formatting to neutralize the colors if we don't have anything in here. Now, let's do a little test. So if I run this function equal to is text on G4, the one we use for our trigger, okay, if it's blank, this shows true, okay. So we are going to use this condition to say that in the event G4 shows blank, it means that an expense has been selected, vice versa, okay. We want you to show blank or white, okay, instead of showing that default green or red, right? I'm going to again carry this formula, okay, equal to is text. If you like, I can even cut it, okay. Then we go to, then we select the income label, come to conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. Then I'll just paste in the formula that we just did. Okay, it's a relative reference, right? You can choose to bring the $ in front of G or not. We are just copying down, right? So this is fine. What do we want if this happens? So what we basically want is that if I choose either expense or income, I want the font, okay, to be white. And then the fill should also be no color, right? So that is what we want here. Now let's see how this works. So I'll click OK. It looks like it's working, but there's a little background in here because the existing conditional format is still running. Okay, so there's a conflict here. We need to tell Excel that if you trigger this first one, or if the condition is met for the empty cell, don't run the rest. Okay, so let's go back to conditional formatting, manage rules. We'll come here, then we will check this box stop if it is true. Okay, so that this takes precedence. Then the applies to, instead of doing this again, we just extend the applies to cover these two. Okay, so I'll just extend this, and then let's apply and see if it fixes this. So apply, okay, right. So let's clear. I get my red and green. If I select only charity, only expense shows up. If I choose consultancy, only consultancy shows up in red. If I clear, I'm back here, right? So that is the dynamic feel we wanted to achieve. So in the end, this is how it's going to look like. If I click on charity, you realize that this blanks out. If I click on consultancy, this blanks out and it moves here, right? To give your user that interactive feel. So that will complete the creation of the dynamic label. Okay, now at this point, let's make progress with the rest of the elements in our final dashboard. So we've already made provision for the income and expense cards that you see here. We want to go ahead and then create this chart. Now this chart breaks down our income lines and our expense lines. So we have to stage a pivot table for this. Then we proceed with the creation of the chart from there. So let's position these slicers. Later we'll take them to the dashboard. Normally when you are building dashboards like this, you can use this calculation page to stage all the summaries and calculations. You can even hide them when you are done with your final presentation, so the user just focuses on the dashboard and the data sets. Okay, so we still have the luxury of inserting a pivot table from the data model, right? So I'll put this here in an existing worksheet. Ideally, you should space out your pivot tables, anticipating expansion when the data grows, okay? But for learning purposes, I'm just placing all the pivot tables here. So once this pivot table comes in, I would activate the field list, and we want to focus on the actual net. Okay, so this is going to be the value. So I'm going to drag actual net to the value section. We start off with that actual position of 7162. This we are going to break down by category. So as I mentioned earlier, your breakdown field for categories should come from the dimension table. So we open up the dimension table and we drag category to the row section. Right. So this is now our actual net broken down by the various categories. So we can sort so that the positive numbers come at the top, and then you have your expenses all the way down to get your net position. So we will simply insert a chart on this by standing in any cell. We'll go to insert. If you don't know the type of chart that is suitable for this data, you can go through recommended charts. So here we have the choice of a clustered column chart or a clustered bar chart in this case, right? So let's use this clustered bar chart. I'll click OK. So for pivot table charts, you normally have to do some primary formatting on the chart, especially to get rid of filled buttons, right? So you select pivot chart analyze and you hide all. Okay, so this is going to take off the filled buttons. We will not need the legend, so we'll take off the legend. We'll also take off the chart title. Okay, then we take off the x-axis label. Now at this point we are going to reverse the order. We want our income lines to come on top. The expenses come below. So I'll do a control 1 here. So control 1 gives you access to the settings of the chart. So when this opens up, you look for under axis options, this option to set the categories in reverse order. So you check this box and you now have the income lines on top. Okay. So we'll do all the formatting later. when we are ready to design our dashboard. But for now, we are just interested in creating the elements that we will use in the dashboard. So this will now take care of the income and expenses chart that we saw. Okay, so now that we are done with this, let's focus on this part of the chart. This chart is supposed to tell us how much we spent on average. We are supposed to also determine the month that has the highest expenditure, right? So we are trying to do two things here. We stage a pivot table for this that would also give birth to the spark line. So to do that, again, we can just start a new pivot table from the data model. So I'll go to Insert, Pivot Table. From the data model, we place this in this existing worksheet. Again, enough space so that you make room for future expansion. Now, this is going to be a breakdown of the actual expense and then actual income, broken down by month. Okay, so let's begin with that actual measure. So this is going to be our actual net. So again, we have something like this. Then we will break this down by month in the row section. So I'll go to calendar and I'm using month name, right? So month name is the one that contains the actual text, January, February, and so on. This one contains values, 1 for January, 12 for December, and so on. Right. We use this to sort the arrangement of the month names properly. So I'll drag month names here. So you notice that because it's just text, Excel chooses to sort this alphabetically. So we want to use the month number to sort this properly. Now, to do that, we have to go back to Power Pivot. So let's go back to Power Pivot. We'll click on Power Pivot. We'll go to Manage. And once we come here, we'll go to the calendar table. So inside the calendar table, this is where we have our calendar columns. So we select month name, which is the column of interest. We want to sort this by using the arrangement or order in another column. Right. So when you click on Sort By column, it now allows you to sort this month name by selecting another column, in this case month. So I'll choose month and I'll click OK. So by doing this, once we exit Power Pivot, the expectation is that this should now be sorted chronologically, right? We expect our slicer, the one we inserted earlier, to also come along. Okay, so you see that this has also been sorted chronologically. Now, while we are here, let's engage our field list. So in the event you can't see your field list, you just have to select the pivot table, go to Pivot Table Analyze, Field List. It comes up here. Okay, so at this point, we can break down our current pivot table summary by the type. So the type is in the categories dimension table. So I'll take type and then push it at the column section. Okay, so this now gives us our income and expense, right? So this is sorted alphabetically, but if you choose to sort this so that income comes before, you could also reverse that. Okay, so you have income and expense, then you have your grand total. Now from this pivot table, we want to create the spark lines, and then we use that to also create that donut chart. Now let's begin with the spark line. So just for you to know, these are spark lines, these in cell charts. Okay, so we want to be able to show the highest points. When we select any of these categories, it should update for income and expenditure, right? So we create for income, we create for expenditure, and then we also create for our average spent. Okay, so let's do that. For spark lines, we need to step out of pivot tables. You cannot set spark lines on pivot tables. So I hope it changes though, but for now, we need to sort of mirror whatever the pivot table has next to the pivot table so that we can use the range to create our sparkline. Right. So I'm going to mirror this. So this is going to be income. I'll select this. Shift right arrow, Control R. Okay. Then shift down all the way up to this point. Press Control D. At this point, if this is going to mirror the 12 months, we need to ensure that we have a system that always will show the 12 months, right? So that you don't have only some months showing when you select the slicer. So we will go inside the pivot table, any cell, right click, come to pivot table options, and under display, we choose to show items with no data on rows. This ensures that when we use slicers, the 12 months would always stay, right? So let's test it to be sure it's working. I'm going to bring this slicer here. While this slicer is here, you'll notice that if I click on charity, these two pivot tables don't respond. The reason is that the slicers were created directly out of the first pivot table. Right, so they are currently not connected to pivot table 2 and pivot table 3. Now, in connecting slicers, you need to be sure that you know the kind of story you want to tell. So some slicers may not give you good insights when you connect them to pivot tables, especially the charts that come out of it. So for testing purposes, we want to connect this slicer. So I'll go report connections and then connect this to pivot table 1 and pivot table 2. Now, just to be sure, to know the name of the pivot table, once you start in the pivot table, you go to pivot charts analyze. The pivot table name will be here. You could always change them to be sure that you are connecting to the right one. So while we are here, let's do that. So let's do actual underscore category so that we know which two fields are used here. Then for this one, let's name this actual and dates. Okay. So now if you come to your slicer and you try to connect, you know what you are connecting to. So let's connect this to actual date and see how this works. So if I click on charity, you notice that this stays and I'm able to now have all the 12 months show, which will be useful for my sparkline. Okay, so that is how we are going to set this up. Okay, so now that we have this, let's proceed and create the sparkline. A pretty simple process. So all you need to do is stand in an empty cell. We will go to insert, then we have our sparklines group here. There can be a line, column, win or loss. In this case, we are choosing column. Okay, so my location range is where I started from. It will ask for the data range. I'll click on the up arrow and select the whole of this. Okay, so I'll click OK. Now you notice that I have my sparkline. Now for consistency, I want to make this a bit bigger. So I'll select it over a range of 6 cells. Okay, this way I can now come home and merge. Okay, to make it a bit bigger. Right, so we use the same style for the remaining 2. Now, while we are here, we can go to sparkline and then set the default color for the sparkline. So everything is going to be gray. Then under marker color, we choose the high point. So the high point here is going to be the month that we spent the most. Okay, so if I click on this, you realize that it's January. Of course, when you use the slicers, this may change. Okay, so that is how we are going to go through this. Now, let's use the same system for our expenses. Okay, so for our expenses, if you like, we could actually make this absolute to make it easier for our sparkline. So I've negated the first one. I'm copying this down. Control D. Okay, just for the purpose of the sparkline. So we highlight this. Okay, then we go through the same process. I stand, in this case, let's stand in this cell. We'll go to insert, we'll use the column sparkline again. So our data range is going to be this. Okay, we'll highlight that and we'll click OK. Okay, so just as we did, we'll go shift right 1, 2. Okay, so we have the same dimension for both sparklines, and we'll merge this. Okay, so while we are here, let's do same. So the sparkline color is going to be gray. This is for the expense. And for the marker color, this time around we want to switch the colors. So instead of green, we'll do red for the high point. So coincidentally, it's in January that we spent and earned the highest values. Okay, so we'll take it as it is. Now, for our third sparkline, we basically want to know the percentage spent, right? So percentage spent, which is going to be how much we spent over income, right? So for every income that we got, how much did we spend every month? So I've just done that division. Control D. So this should be in percentage. Control Shift percentage. Now the same thing we did with the sparklines. We want to also show the sparklines for the percentage spent, right? So to do that, again, I'll go to Insert, Column Sparkline. My data range is going to be this one. Okay, I'll click OK. So sparkline comes here, shift right 1, 2. Again, just to maintain the dimension, and I'll merge this. Okay, so we'll paint this gray and highlight the high point. For variation, we'll just do this pink if you like, or you can also maintain the same red color. Okay, so these are the 3 sparklines that you see here. We just generated them. We also have our chart. What is left now is this donut chart. We already have the percentages here, right? So let's take an average of these percentages, okay, to give us a sense of how. So it's about 93%. Now this is what we are going to use to plot the chart, right? Now normally, if you want to plot the donut chart, you need the remainder, right? So the remainder is going to be 1 minus your actual, which is 7% in this case. The 2 should give us the 100%. Okay. So this is fine, but sometimes you need to make room for situations where you exceed 100%. Okay, so with these 2 highlighted, if I go ahead and I do my donut chart, so I'm going to do my donut chart. Okay, so this correctly plots the 97%. Okay, but in the event you have, let's say, 120%. Okay, this display really doesn't make sense, right? So we need to let the chart show a full circle in the event we exceed 100%, right? So what we do normally is to modify the original formula, okay, which is average, and cap it at 100%. To do that, we just run a min function where we say compare this calculation you've done with 1, which is 100%. In the event this calculation exceeds 100%, revert to 1, which is 100%. This way we can always have the 100% when we have more than 100. Okay, so we'll use this because we are going to use this for plotting. We also need the label to be correctly calculated, right? So this is going to be different from what is plotting. So in the event this exceeds 100%, let's say 120%, okay, this is going to return 100, but we need that 120 to show as the label. So in that case, we have to repeat the original formula and use it as the label. Okay, so this is going to be the original formula without the min cap. Okay, so we are set. We can now proceed and then create our dashboard. All our elements are present here. So to create our dashboard, we proceed and insert a new worksheet. So I'll hit this plus sign and let's rename this dashboard. So normally you have your grid lines, right? So these are my grid lines. Now let's go through a process that will make this easier for you. Before you start, you can actually create more room for yourself by double clicking on any of the tabs. Okay, this folds up the entire ribbon so that you have more space. Then you need to go through a process we call mockup, or creating a wireframe that allows you to know where to place each element of your dashboard. Then you take note of margins, right? These columns help you separate the elements. So if you take a look at the final work, column A, F, K, and P are set in consistent widths to allow us to separate the elements. Okay, so guided by this, we are now going to use this to stage the positions of the elements in the dashboard. Okay, so first let's set the margin. So A, F, K, and P. I mean, this is not cast in stone, so you could always make modifications if you like. Okay, so I'm going to select A, F, K, and P. Right. Well, pardon my disappearing labels. Okay, it happens sometimes. So this I'm going to set to a column width of 2. So you can do that by coming to Home, the Cells group. You see Format, and you set your column width, okay, to 2. The shortcut for this is Alt-H-O-W. Right. So this is what we have. Now we can now use, if you like, very simple border lines to show the positions of each element. Okay, so if you look closely, this first box starts from B2 to E14, okay, then G2 to J14 and so on. So let's do that. So B2 to E14, come home, then we use the outside borders, so just pencil marking. Okay, so this one is going to also be here. So I can do a repetition of the border line, or I can just press F4, right? In Excel, F4 repeats your last formatting action. Okay, so this is F4. Then the bigger chart comes from L2 to O27, right? So L2 to O27. Now, this may not be the same if you have a wider screen. So you may just have to eyeball and adjust accordingly. We basically just want to use the entire space well. When you're creating dashboards, you want to avoid situations where your client or the user is scrolling up, left or right just to view elements. So you could also make adjustments, just ensure that everything can be seen and there are no unusual white spaces idle, right? So this is going to be for the third element, and then the last one will start from B16, right, if you like, to J27. So we start from B16 to J27, something like this, right? So I'll do another F4. So this will be the layout for our 4 major blocks. So we'll dedicate this side to our slicers, right? So we have something like this. Then our month slicer will occupy this space. Okay. So this is going to be how we lay out our dashboard. Everything in view. Okay, so we take advantage of that. You take that into consideration when you are creating your wireframes. Okay, now we are going to draw shapes using these marks. Okay, so let's go to Insert, Illustration, Shapes. We are using this rounded convex rectangle. So we'll click on it. It helps if you hold down the Alt key, okay, to draw the shape. Okay, so if you hold down the Alt key, it snaps to the edges of your cells to make it easier for you. Okay, so I started from B2 and then I just stretched it along the area that has been marked. We can modify the roundness a bit by clicking and holding it, pushing it to the left. Okay, so we have something like this. To make it easier for us, what we want to do is we want to format this whole thing. Then once we are done, we'll transfer our work onto the rest of the pages, the rest of the blocks. Okay, so let's select the shape. We come to shape format and we'll choose a white fill. So once we choose a white fill, we'll choose for shape outline and no outline. Okay, at this point you see the shape is almost disappearing. Then for shape effects, we'll come to shadow. Okay, now we will choose this first shadow, but to set the right color for this, we'll go to shadow options. Okay, so shadow options will bring us here. In the presets, we'll go ahead and choose the first bottom right option. Okay, so this shows us the edges of our shape. Then under color, we are going to use a special color. So let's come to more colors. And for this, we are going to use this hex code. The hex code here is 9DC3E6. Okay, set to the default 60%. Right. So it's a nice gray color from Lara. So I'll click OK. So we have something like this. So at this point, we can proceed and put in the elements in our shape. Now, if you look at the final work, these are text boxes. Okay, so we have actual, we have budget, we have variance, and then we have our trend. We just need to insert these text boxes, duplicate them, and then we have them aligned like that. So let's do that. So we'll come here, insert text box, first text box. So you just have to eyeball and then pick this slot somewhere here. Right, you are fitting 4 of them. Right, so let's name this actual. Okay, then we will duplicate it. So you can do a Control D to duplicate this, or you can hold Control Shift, click and hold and drag. I prefer this method because it aligns the text boxes. So 2, 3, 4, right? So text box 1, text box 1, text box 2, text box 3, and then we have the 4th one here. We'll go ahead and then make the necessary changes. So this is budget. This is going to be variance. And then finally, we'll have our trend. So now that we have this, we can highlight the text boxes by holding down Control. Okay, so you hold down Control and you select. Right. We can now reduce the font a bit to about 10. Okay, and then change this to the last gray font that we have here. Okay, so while we are here, you could also hold and then reduce the size a bit so that you create enough space. Now while this is selected, we can go to shape format and then choose shape outline, no outline for this. So in the end, we have something like this, nicely set out to give us the labels that we want. Okay, so now that we have this, let's now bring in the corresponding values. So for actual, this is going to be another text box. So I'll take advantage of this one. Control D to copy, or you click Control Shift R, you slide to the right. Okay, this makes sure that it's aligned. Okay, so for this, we will make the font, the automatic color, black, and then increase the font a bit. Okay, to about 12. Align center in the middle. Okay, and then we can bold in this. Okay, now this is going to take our first value. So the first value is going to be the actual value. So while this is selected, please click inside the formula bar, hit the equal sign inside the formula bar. Then you come to your calculations and you select the first number here, which is your actual income, and then you press enter. Okay, so this gives you the value. You may have to repeat the formatting. So this is 100,000. If you go back to the source, you can do a Ctrl+Shift+1. Okay, sometimes you need to repeat the formatting for it to take effect. So let's make the necessary adjustments. We want to get rid of the 2 decimal place. So while we are here, I can highlight the whole of this and reduce our decimal place. Okay, so this should take effect. We can increase this a bit now. So this is going to be the value for our actual. Then we come down here. So this is going to be for budget, but we need to make reference to budgets as we did. So I'll select this, highlight, put in a new equal sign, go to our calculations, and then for our budget net, I'll select this and press enter. Right. Well, we could just apply this format painter here to save us the trouble. So this is now for our actual and our budget. Now we need to bring in the dynamic label. The dynamic label sits in our calculations. Okay, so this is what we are carrying. Now we want to paste this as a linked image using the camera tool. Okay, using the camera tool. Recent versions of Excel allow you to place images in cell, but for the wider audience, you could also use the camera tool to do this. So if you don't have the camera tool, you can check your quick access toolbar, right? Drop it down in this drop down, and when you go to more commands, right? So you can scroll to the camera, double click. This will move it to the list of QAT tools that you currently have. Okay, so ensure that it's moved to the right and you click OK. Okay, so we are going to use this to capture this image. So you could also copy and then paste as an image, but I like the camera tool because it's a bit more direct. Okay, so let's click on this. So it copies, then you come to the dashboard and then you just click inside this space. This now gives you that linked image. So it's a picture, as you can see. So under the picture format, I'll come to picture border, put in no border, and then just like that, you realize that it sits in nicely against my variance. Okay, let's use the same method for the spark line for income. So we drop that one here. So I'll select it. Now that my camera tool is here, I'll just click on it, come to my dashboard, and I'm going to drop this, click on it once, and it just transposes it here. Okay, so just as we did for this one, I'll come to my picture format and then put in no border lines for this. Okay, so that is what we have. Now the last thing we are going to do is to put in our caption for income. So this is also going to be another text box. So let's recycle what we had here. So Control drag up. So this is going to copy what I have. You can do a Control C, Control V as well. Let's name this income. You can increase the fonts to about 15, bolden this, and then take it to the default color. Okay, so this is going to be our income. So increase this to about 16. Okay, now to make it easier on the eye, let's insert a simple straight line. So under shapes, we just insert this line. Hold the shift key to ensure that it comes in as a straight line. So while this is here, you can press Ctrl 1 and then reduce the width of the line, okay, to about 0.75, or if you like, yes, 0.75 is fine. And then we change the color to black automatic. So this gets us close to what we are looking for. If you like, you can also convert the default black color to the green color. You can change it to green if you like. So in that case, you also have to change the line to green. Okay. So as for designing dashboards, please feel free to be as creative but minimal as possible so you don't distract. Now that we are done, you could also add some icons if you like. So under illustrations, you can go to here and then put in icons. So for icons, I search for arrows. So this looks like money coming in, and then we have another one that takes money out, right? So I'm bringing in these two for what I'm going to use. So I'm just adding this, and then I'll color this green to match the theme. Okay, so at least it's easier for somebody to determine that this is bringing money in. We'll keep this on the side for now. Now that we've finished the design for our income, we basically can copy all the elements and make the changes. Now there's a way to highlight and select all the elements here by switching to selecting objects under find and select. Okay, so if I come to find and select objects, this, my cursor points changes to an arrow. Okay, so if let's say I highlight around all the elements that I want to lift, I can highlight like this, right? And do a Control C, then come to G2 and then paste this. Okay, so I can just gently move this and then make sure this is aligned. Okay, so at this point, we've cut down most of the work. We just basically need to edit and then bring in the corresponding elements. So let's do that quickly. So you can press escape and then your cursor will change from the select objects to the default. Okay, so let's make some quick changes here. This is going to be expense. Right, let's drag this a bit so that we have everything on one line. So we are going to replace this arrow with this version that we just brought in. Let's resize it. So just eyeball. So when you place it here and you can't see it, it's probably hidden at the back. So you go to graphics format, then you bring it to the front. So we are going to color this to red. So the red we are going to use is this red here. The hex code for that is FF999. Okay, so that's what we are going to use to color this. So we have something like this. We'll highlight our expense and then do same. For that and the line. Change the shape outline to the color. Okay. So now let's quickly replace our values and then reference this. So I have this value, but for display purposes, it would be nice to have this as an absolute number. So I'm going to put in the minus sign, but this will give me an error because I cannot do this directly in the formula. So the workaround will be either to reference the absolute version of this, right, in another cell. So let's do that just to ensure we are consistent with our calculations. So we'll create a mirror reference here for our expense. Come to our dashboard, and then this time around, instead of the original calculation, we'll come here and then reference this instead. Okay. So let's do same for the budget expense. We'll come here and then reference this one instead. Okay. So just as we did for the income lines, we'll apply the format painter. I'll select income, double click on the format painter so I can apply this here and there. Okay. So this gives me my actual expense. Now we'll delete these two and then go through the process to bring in the expense label. So I'll select this, activate the camera, come to the dashboard, and then just drop this here. Click once and it appears. So just align it to what you have, come to the picture format, and then take off the borderline to no borderline. So make sure it's well aligned. Then we'll bring in the spark line for the expenses. Okay, so for that, we'll come, make sure you are picking the right elements. So again, I'll come here, take this, come to my dashboard, and drop it here. Right. This is now going to be our complete income and expense card. Okay, so we are now done with this. Now for our next chart, we don't really need the elements, we just need the backdrop, the shape. So please select just that, Control Shift right to just copy the original backdrop, and then you can now stretch it using the Alt key. So this is what we have for our chart. So let's bring in the chart that we just created, which is going to be this chart. So I'll take this time you can cut it and then come to your dashboard and paste it right here. So I'll come in here and try and fit it nicely in the backdrop. Stretch this all the way down, okay, to make room. Now for starters, let's take off the grid lines. So we delete the grid lines, select one of the bars, press Ctrl 1 so you have access to all of it and the settings, and then let's reduce the gap width to make the bars a bit bigger. So we have something like this. About 20% should be fine, depending on your screen. Okay, so while the format data series is open, you can click on the fill bucket, and then let's go open up the fill bucket. This allows us to choose a solid fill. Okay, now if you choose a solid fill, it goes to the default color. In this case, it's white. We can maintain green for all the bars for starters, but there's an option here for invert if it's negative. Okay, so the default color is going to be for the positive numbers, and then for our negative numbers, we choose the pink color we just used for the expense label. Okay, so this is how it's going to look. So while we are here, I'll select the charts, hit this plus sign. Then for the grid lines, we are going to engage the major horizontal lines, okay, to make it easier for us to see where each bar fits. Then you can select the labels on the left side, press Ctrl 1. Under the labels section, we open up the labels section. Okay, the label position is currently next to axis. Right, we want to set this a bit off the axis, so we'll set this to low, so that we have enough space between the labels and where the charts begin. Okay, at this point we can bring in our data labels, so I'll click and then bring in the data labels. Like I said, we can take off the decimal places, so I'll press Ctrl 1. Then in the number section, you open this up, we choose number, and then we reduce the decimal places to 0. Okay, so we have something like this. We can even reduce the font slightly to just make use of the space, bolding it for compensation. Okay, so we have something like this. We could also make our labels a bit darker, so we can choose black for this. Okay. Now the last thing we need to do is take off the border lines for the charts. So we select the charts and then you take off the shape outline. Okay, so this is now going to be for your chart. Let's drop it down a bit to make room for the label that we are going to use for this chart. So in the final dashboard, we call this summary. So I'm going to copy this and then call this summary. So this is going to be black. We take off all the pencil marks and then we have our clean chart. Okay, so next up, let's look at our final chart, which is the average spend chart. We already have it. So we'll come here, come and cut this chart. We come to our dashboard and then we paste this here. Okay, so we will align it to the space that we've allotted for this. So let's fill up everything here. The rest of the elements will come inside. Once this chart is selected, we'll go to Format, Shape Fill, and then we'll choose No Fill to make it a bit transparent. Okay. Then, because this is a spending chart, we select the portion for the main series, which is the blue for spending in my case. Press Ctrl 1, and let's change this to a solid fill of the red color. And then we'll come here, and for the remainder, we'll change it to this shade of gray, if you like. Okay, so this is going to be our donut chart. Now, while we are here, we can insert a text box for our label. So I like recycling text boxes, so I'm selecting this one. I'll push it down here in the middle, and we are going to reference our label. So that's 93% that we set out for the label. Remember, it is this one that is for the label, the one that doesn't have the min. So we bring that one in. Okay, we'll increase the font a bit, align it middle and center. We increase the font to about 24. Okay, depend on your screen. Okay, it just has to sit nicely in the middle. So this is what we have. Now, in the final thing, we are supposed to have these labels: average, percentage spent, and then the monthly trend. So again, let's recycle. So let's set this right. So we have something like this. I'll just duplicate this and put in our monthly trend over here. So for our monthly trend, we have our spark line. So this is the last spark line. So I'm going to use the camera, select this, come to the dashboard, and just click the space I want to insert this. Okay. So as we did earlier, we'll come Picture Format, and then take off the borderline for this. Right. Now, you notice that we have this faint pink color, just to let you know that this works. If I go to the spark line and then let's say decide that that's high point, I want to change the color to a deeper red. Okay, this changes. So once I come to my dashboard, realize that it also changes here. Okay, just to show you the impact. Okay, so at this point we can erase the pencil marks and then do some final tweaks. So let's first take off the grid lines. So View, take off grid lines, then we'll highlight everything, Control A, come to Home, and come to No Border. Okay, so we have something like this, right? You can make little modifications like expanding some of the margins if you like. Okay, so for this particular one, we can stretch it a bit to get more room for our chart. Go through all the iterations to ensure that in the end you have a very nice dashboard. So I'll take off the shape outline for this as well. So for this particular chart, we should have actually brought in the placeholder. That's the background that we used. Okay, so I'm going to drag this out and then put this on top of this mark out the area, okay, just to be consistent with our design. So another way you could do this, so we have something like this. We come to shape format, and then we take this to the back. Okay, so we should have done this earlier, but in case you forget, you could always bring it back so that we have this nice view. Okay, now the last thing we want to do is to bring in our slicers. So we'll come and collect our slicers. We have 3 of them. So we have type, hold control, select month name, hold control, select category. If you cut the slicers temporarily, your calculations will go off. So you paste everything and they come back alive. Okay, so let's see where they are. So you deselect, we have our month name here, and we have our category all the way. So we'll put type here, and then for our month name, we'll drop it below, and then our category is also going to sit here. Now the thing with slicers is that you can always format them to break them into columns. So I'll take type, come to slicer, and then break this into 2 columns. And then reposition my category. We'll do same for month name. So slicer, we put in 12 columns so that we can stretch this all the way here to see our 12 months. Okay, so we have something like this. Right. Now let's test our slicers and see where the interaction is happening. So if I click on charity, you notice that this top part is behaving correctly, but our spark lines are not behaving well. So this is what I mentioned about knowing how to connect your slicers. This is so because we have the slicer connected to our very first pivot table and the breakdown by month. Okay, so we want this portion to be stable because it's always going to show the 12 months. So what I will do is I'll right click, go to report connections, and then deactivate the slicer from filtering that pivot table, and I'll click OK. So now if I click, you realize that it stays. This is how we want it. If I click on consultancy, it moves to the left. Okay, just as we have it. Now this value error is coming out because we did a mirror reference to the original expense line. So we just need to wrap an if error around this. Okay, that in the event it's blank, show blank instead. So once I do this, I can just copyright. Okay, so these are some of the little tweaks that we need to do. Right. So if I click on charity, this clothing, that consultancy to the left, if I click, everything comes back here. Okay, so this can nicely filter this. Then for our month, we can use this to filter our summary. Okay, so let's right click this, report connections, and this is where we had the actual and category. So we click OK. So if I click on January, you notice that it filters this chart and the labels. Now, because we use cube formulas, for the first time is getting data from the data model, you may see this temporal getting data. Okay, so it will normally reset when you come back again. Okay, so the point where you click it the second or third time onwards, it should be very smooth. So if you get that feedback, just be a little patient. Once the value arrives, you should now see that it is responding. Okay, so if I clear this, I'm back to where we started from. So we've done the connection for category and then month name. What of type? So for type, depends on the story you want to tell. So we can decide that we can link it to this summary so that we can highlight only income and only expense if you like. So we'll come here, report connections, and then we'll link it to the actual category pivot table. Okay. So we'll click OK and see how this behaves. So if I do only income, you notice that it zooms into only the income. And if I do only expense, it zooms into only the expenses. So basically, you connect your slicers to the relevant charts so that in the end, they come together to create the story that you want your user to take away. Okay, so if you have come this far, congratulations. We've basically built this personal finance dashboard from all the tools that we mentioned at the start of this journey. Power Query, Power Pivot, the data model in Power Pivot, PivotTables, Cube Functions, Slicers, Sparklines, charts, all together to give us this beautiful dashboard. I'm sure you've learned some lessons, and I'll be happy to see how you apply this at work. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.
If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos, or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.